Welcome to episode 145 of the Left Behind Game Club. This week, we complete our Life is Strange series with episode 5, Polarized. Let's get right into it.
You're listening to the Left Behind Game Club.
Welcome to the Left Behind Game Club, our never-ending attempt to make sure that no game is left behind. I'm your host, Jacob McCourt, and I have two friends here with me today. Your first friend, you know him, you love him. His name is Michael Ruffalo.
I now get the hype.
Oh, okay. And here to talk about Life is Strange hype with us, our second friend, Flora Eloise. Flora, hello.
Always take the shot.
Take all shots. I like it. Okay, so this is... Mike, you want to say something?
No, that's my life philosophy. Shoot all shots, you know? Like, let's go for it.
Shoot all shots. Always. This is our 5th episode in the Life is Strange series. If you haven't listened to our first 4 episodes, I insist you do that before you listen to this. So go through the feed, find it. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. But we're here to talk about episode 5 today, Polarized. Does anyone want to give a quick recap of where we left off in episode 4? Because if not, I can just give you those morsels that you need to jump into this episode. Morsels was a weird word.
I think, you know, if I'm trying to do some real condensing here, we went to a party. We tried to warn Victoria away from our boy, the Prescott. And surprise, surprise, Chloe gets axed. Not literally with an axe, but, you know, she gets ba-boom. And then you find out Hottie McCreeperson, as Jacob early pegged him. Or maybe that's a poor turn of phrase, as Jacob early named him, was the actual big bad throughout this game.
And you begin this episode tied to a chair in a bit of a drug-induced haze, with Victoria standing next to you in what is the dark room, surrounded by Mr. Jefferson, who is now taking your picture and being an awful, awful human being.
Real creepy. Like,
yeah,
I understand the, like, oh, there were hints all along, but not in this tone. Like, this was a real tone shift.
Yeah, I don't know that his performance here is actually quite earned in the story. It feels like the tone of his voice changes, the texture of his voice changes. He starts monologuing at length to himself, like transparently about his motivations, his psychology, why he's doing what he's doing in this dark room. It's a very unusual turn of character, and I don't know that on a replay I was able to believe it, even anticipating that we would have this reveal.
Yeah, he almost had 2 different personalities and would often like oscillate between like being really vulgar and terrible to Max, and then like kind of be reserved and be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I called you a really awful name. Are you comfortable? Can I get you some water? Even though I've kidnapped you here." It was kind of over the top for me in a way that wasn't earned.
And speaking of like the kind of double personality thing, there's a little slip-up line in Jefferson's monologues where he refers to himself as Nathan. I think it only happens once, but it was off-putting enough to, like, he's been covering up this story and like probably telling multiple versions of the truth, i.e. lies. And at some point, he's been willing to blame Nathan on why all of these young women have been disappearing and why they have been potentially murdered. And so like that little slip up I think is quite revealing of that like fractured psyche that we're encountering here.
Interesting. I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on it either. I think that there was a comment in the Discord from Setobox that I keep going back to of his initial monologue, which at some point during this episode you relive, where he speaks about like a picture, essentially like setting up the fact that he takes pictures of women in his dark room in compromising positions, which foreshadowing, I guess, that I didn't notice until now. A couple things happen here really quickly that I just want to touch on here. Your leg ends up being freed from the chair, which is going to be significant in the future. Your journal is in the room. Reminder, Max has the ability to travel in time if she focuses on a photograph. I have to tell you, if you're not in the Discord, because of Mike, there is a meme now of look at this photograph with Max and Chloe. It's wonderful. Mike, you're a gift. Thank you.
You cannot tell me that the Life is Strange community has not created that meme already. Like,
they probably have.
Yeah,
they
have to have.
Yeah, they have to have.
But I'll take that, Jacob. Thank you.
You're welcome. Jefferson, you travel back in time using a photo to literally like hours earlier when Jefferson was taking photos of Max. And that's when you really realize that, hey, I need to go further back in time because that's how I end up not in this situation.
Yeah, so I think where we really end up is playing a bit of game of rewind, of not only hopping back in time, but also trying to make sure that you help the one person that comes to save you survive and win the battle. Does anyone want to walk us through that?
Yeah, I think the first real jump, because again, there are several jumps. If you pass the one that I just talked about of her going back a few hours, the first real one is jumping back to the first day of class with Jefferson that you experienced in the first episode, where you decide that, okay, my solution here is that I'm just going to tattle on Jefferson, which will change essentially all the events that happened after this. I'm also going to submit my photo to the photo contest as well. So like almost trying to get the best ideal outcome that you would get in like a Telltale game, for example. Max is just trying to game it from the start.
It's almost like a Life is Strange fan playing this for a second time.
Yeah, honestly, truly. Not really a lot of choices that were significant in this episode, which I think is quite the departure. Really, there's a bunch of minor choices, and then there's really one choice at the end. So I think that we're just going to continue to travel through time, both back and forth, and then just cover things that we thought were really significant here. I think the first real significant... Flora, did you want to jump in?
Well, I just had an observation about this episode, which is that like the nature of going back in time so often, like when history is rewritten in the Life is Strange universe through these photographs, we see the photographs change on screen. There's like usually like a slow montage.
I love that touch.
Yeah, it's very visually pleasing, but I think the presentation works really well in this episode because it's almost as if like the storyline is suspended in time along with the photographs. Like the music kind of like withdraws itself in those moments. And I just thought that was kind of a dramatic attitude adjustment from the earlier iterations of Max. Like there's a sort of like singular focus here in this episode that just wasn't present prior.
I thought a really nice touch that I question a little bit, and I know stylistically why they did it, but when the pictures change, like between different scenes, it'll almost be exposed like you're dipping it in like a dark room set of chemicals, which... It's funny because Jefferson uses that style of photography and not Max. Max uses a Polaroid, so I thought that was maybe interesting and unintentional, but it was a cool visual effect. A cool visual effect that takes us onto a plane going to San Francisco. A bunch of different things happen. So I think Jefferson is arrested. Nathan essentially gets pegged as well. His father also gets pulled into it. And Max wins the contest, and you end up on a flight with your principal. Is that Principal Wells? Yeah, Principal Wells, and you're on your way to San Francisco because you won the Everyday Heroes photo contest. Which very jarring, given that you were literally kidnapped, bound in a underground bunker literally 2 minutes ago.
There's not much to really reflect on here, personally. I think this is a very passive experience where you're just sort of trapped in your airplane seat, and then you observe a few things like the cartoon character, or I think it's actually a video game character, Hot Dog Man, and then Principal Wells has fallen asleep in the chair next to you. And there's a sense of temporary relief, at least I think on a first playthrough, because, okay, this sort of inescapable situation, you've actually broken free quite quickly. There's some trial and error puzzling in the dark room that I found annoying on the first playthrough. But here, like, okay, we have our escape plan, we're going, and Max is going to have a nice happily ever after where her photography is accepted and she's, traveling to network in San Francisco and everything looks great. But there's really not a lot that happens at this point other than just Max thinking to herself about how...
Do it.
No, I'm not going to do it because this episode does it to us a lot where it says, life is... ... and then fills in the blank with something else. It was a very it was a peculiar event. How about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt like it was too perfect of an ending for how early it was in the episode. If they had saved that ending for just nigh of the end, it would have been way more on some level impactful. But yeah, it was a real like, oh, this is too good to be true. We know this is not how it's actually going to end. Let's see where it goes from here. I really just tried to speed through this as fast as I could.
Yeah, I don't want to say I was let down at that point in the episode, but I had expected some like Herculean struggle between Max and Jefferson and a real confrontation at that point. So I think it was like really weird to be swerved and be like, actually, here's your happy ending. Enjoy it. You find out maybe it's not the happy ending that you thought it was. When you arrive at the gallery, your picture's there. You rub shoulders with a bunch of important high types, if you will. And that's really when you realize that maybe everything that you... Maybe this ending isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be.
Yeah. I don't remember where this ultimately falls apart. Mostly because there's so many ways each of these realities fall apart and is lacking in one way or another that I was like, oh, not only am I not going to keep track of all of these, there's almost no reason. Like, none of these are quote-unquote canon.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, like, it does seem like everything is sort of like working out in Max's favor, and then until she gets like a phone call, if I recall correctly, from Chloe, and the tornado, as it were, is still coming. So despite Jefferson being busted, despite Max having her art accepted, the impending sort of like, let's say, butterfly effect event of Max's initial choice in episode 1 is still coming to bear itself upon the Bay. So Max is forced to abandon this otherwise successful reality because she feels some degree of responsibility for the harm, or at least responsibility to mitigate it. So we find ourselves back in the dark room yet again.
And I think the series of events really quickly is like, you use the photo in the gallery to be able to bring yourself to your room where you took the winning photo. You rip it up, and that has the butterfly effect of you ending up back in the dark room. But at this point, your journal and all of your photos have been burned by Jefferson because he was so upset that you like had a winning photo and you just threw it away. And by extension, that means that Max has nothing in the room to help her move back in time further than like since she was kidnapped. I think that's how that happens.
Absolutely is. And it seems a little bit shocking at first because it, like, Max's inner monologue is to expect that she can still avert this crisis in some meaningful way by using this photograph, but then reality, as she describes it, breaks, and then like that's why inevitably it's almost like fatalistic. She's back there without any photographs to lean upon.
And that's when you're confronted again with Mr. Jefferson, who gives you several choices before he ultimately says, I'm done with you, so I'm going to drug you one last time, which will end your life. So you're given a bunch of different choices between drinking water, having the lights turned off, having some music turned on, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things, like, there's a lot of repeating and moving back in time and forth in time here. But this is when David comes to rescue you because he knew exactly what was going on. He was the one that found you in the dark room by luck, really. And you really have to just maneuver yourself into the best position to help David confront Mr. Jefferson, like, as he's sneaking up on him.
Do you not send him a text with basically all of the details?
Yes, you do send him a text, like, I don't know if it's in this timeline or the previous timeline, but at one point you do send a text message to him. Right.
And so the way that plays out is, he's coming around the corner, and it's a series of, you need to wait until Jefferson beats or kills our guy, and then you rewind time and press the button to warn him of what's going to happen. So at first it's, watch out for the tripod that he's going to hit you with when you come around the corner. Then it's, throw the camera that's on the ground. And then,
or I think it's like you have to like push the cart towards him with your foot that's exposed, and then pull the cable, which knocks the light down, I think.
So I never had to push the cart. The cart was already out of the way. I just had to pull the cable, which knocked the light down. And that was the last one, which allowed David to run up, knock him out, and which I think you're then faced with, correct me if I'm wrong, our first real decision in the episode.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a warning about a gun too, because Jefferson has a gun inside of the cabinet on the left-hand side of the room, and you also have to be like, hey, he's got a gun, and that's when David runs for the gun. But yes, that's when we get our first big choice, which Jefferson's on the ground, David is above him, you are out of your, your chains, shackles, thank you. And the choice is David going to kill Jefferson because he just found out that Chloe was killed by him, or are you going to essentially say, hey, please do not kill Jefferson? What did y'all do here?
It's interesting because they don't play it as he will murder him if you tell him the truth.
Fair.
They just play it as, are you going to tell him what actually happened to Chloe, or are you going to lie to him? And I think it weighs on the, I don't know if this is unfair to say, the emotional intelligence of your Max character at the time to understand what he would probably do. But, and I know we've talked a bit about ethics along the journey of playing this game, but it really struck me as that Kantian critique, or the critique of Kantian ethics, of, well, what are you supposed to do if an axe murderer comes to the door and says, I want to kill the person inside? Do you lie to them or not? And the Kantian response is, you don't lie to them because that's how you remove their moral choice, right? You subvert their ability to make a moral choice, but that doesn't mean you can't do everything possible to prevent them from murdering someone. And so I was like, look, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I'm gonna tell you the truth. Chloe's dead. And I did not realize you would not be able to rewind and try other things. I think it was actually one of the more frustrating bits throughout that you're not actively drugged at the moment. You've just used your rewind powers, but you can't continue to rewind and say that message in a different way that might prevent him from killing Jefferson. So I felt a little bit cheated, but I kind of understand why it had to go that way.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring this up, but since we had our previous episode discussion about the trolley problem, I don't know if either of you noticed this, but what you all described as cart earlier is actually referred to in the game as a trolley, and so I have this section in my notes just labeled as the trolley problem. But yeah, the problem of universalizability and retribution and things like that are I think it's hard to enjoy the story of this game while explicitly thinking in terms of those moral frameworks. But I do think that ultimately, Jefferson, there's zero chance of redemption for him. So I'm not usually one to say that bad people should be killed. But in that instance, I don't see a way that Jefferson can honestly be rehabilitated or anything. So I'm kind of willing to let, for the sake of narrative payoff and thematic closure, let David take him out.
So in this case, I think both myself and Flora allowed David to kill Jefferson. Mike, what did you do here?
I told him the truth, and he killed Jefferson. I was like,
okay,
yeah,
so all three of
Chloe's
us.
dead. I saw it. It happened. Yeah, unfortunately, David kills him, but I really think there should have been an option to, similar to the previous episode, where you're able to navigate a series of dialogues with Frank to make sure no one dies. I think there should have been a perfect way to end this.
Yeah, I think you could easily separate, because you're correct in suggesting, Mike, that this choice is presented to you in terms of whether or not you tell David about Chloe. I think that could be itself a choice, and then additionally, what David does with that information. I think it would be more meaningful to have some kind of dialogue tree or puzzle like that to kind of pull those two apart, so David might actually take the more pacifistic option.
Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, first, I don't think we talked about this, but I feel extra redeemed that I feel like while Jacob was right about quote unquote Hottie McHotterson, I feel like I was right about David. And I feel like it would have been the right move for his arc to show that progress of, yeah, he was willing to go to therapy and counseling. He was willing to take actions to be a new man and to be a different person. For him to not do the thing that was probably most easy for him, or most natural, which was to kill Jefferson.
Can I bring up something that is tangentially related to this?
No.
We haven't really talked... All right, sounds great.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
We didn't talk about the fact that right after that, you find out that Nathan left a voicemail on Max's phone that essentially, in this timeline, apologizes for hurting Kate, hurting Rachel, and that he has been killed by Mr. Jefferson. That's something we find out, but we haven't even talked about that Nathan was killed in this timeline by Jefferson, and kind of tries to apologize. I don't know how I felt about that.
I didn't really keep track of who was dead or alive in each of the... Again, I kind of realized at some point none of these timelines matter, so I'm not going to keep track of them. But yeah, I don't know if you spent some time doing this, but if you look at the phone, there are some really weird text messages in each of these timelines. No,
all that I really noticed is that I'm actually thinking about a different game I'm playing. Sorry. I was thinking about Nier and how the menus sometimes are scrambled. Sorry.
What about you, Flora?
Yes, I didn't really pay attention to the phone on this playthrough, but I do distinctly remember, at some later point in this episode, Max receives a text message from the dog, Pompadour or whatever. I think this is in this nightmare sequence that happens later in the episode. And yeah, people are behaving uncharacteristically throughout, but that's the one that lingers in my mind as just nonsense.
You leave the room, and that's when you discover truly what's happening outside the bunker, which is that the tornado in this playthrough has started to wreak havoc on Arcadia Bay, and Max is in the middle of it. So she essentially moves through a war zone down the main street of Arcadia Bay, right near the Two Whales Diner, saving some characters, not saving others. There's a few choices in here that you can decide to do or not decide to do. For example, you can save a trucker, or you can save Evan, you can try and save Alyssa, who's in a house and who can just fall through a hole in the floor. The fisherman's there, and that's really a lot of the minor choices here.
Just a quick note on Alyssa. Sorry, I have to. This was the moment that I realized Alyssa's just constantly in trouble. She's constantly just a damsel in distress, always in the worst place at the worst time. It took me this long in the game to realize it, and I just wanted to admit that all to you.
I guess that's something I more easily notice because there's so many photo-based achievements that you have to take that involve her comic relief to some extent. But I'm glad that we're touching on Alyssa right away, because that was the character in particular here that broke my game. And I had to the game would not let me climb up on the surface that you need to climb on to then coax her down from the ledge. It wouldn't let me interact with the surrounding environment. It's a tiny little puzzle to get her down from where she's in distress. And I think this happened 2 times where I had to just reload from the menu or close the game entirely. And I find the fact that I didn't encounter that on the original game is yet another just kind of continual nail in the coffin on this remaster. And I found that in when you're trying to save a character in a slow, tedious sequence like this, that's really discouraging to want to do the optional thing.
I do want to give this game props. Since we started this series, they had a huge patch, and I don't think I mentioned it last episode, but on episode 4 and 5 for me, they patched the next-gen versions on, I think, Xbox Series X and PS5. It's now 60 frames per second. And I have to tell you, it kind of is game-changing, having it go from 30 to 60. The game doesn't look particularly great. I'm sure they've updated some of the assets, but I think it moves in a way that is very different than when I started the series. So I did want to call that out, despite having glitches like you have throughout my playthrough at multiple points. All of this to work your way towards the diner, where you essentially this whole time you're trying to find a photo that that your boy Warren has that can help you move even further back in time and help you really solve this conundrum. And so you make your way to the diner, and that's where essentially, from my memory, this is the point where is that the point where everyone is in the diner, or is that later in the episode?
Well, there's 2 diner encounters here. This is the last one in reality that you're in there. There's a sort of entourage of the side characters that you can bring some degree of closure with. Like Warren obviously is there. Joyce is there. Frank, if he is still alive in your playthrough, is there. It's not the entire cast of everybody, but yes, there is another diner sequence later where I think every single character model like that has a name made it in.
This is where you're given a very difficult choice. What do you do with Warren? Do you, before you grab the photo to move into the past, do you kiss? Do you hug? Do you leave?
Okay, so let me just start off by saying I understand that there was the moment earlier in the game where you could have that romantic moment with Chloe, but I felt like in that moment in time, it came out of the blue. Like, it felt like it was something I was not picking up on previously. Whereas it seemed like they had been setting up some like stuff with Warren in some capacity. At least people had been goading, people had been suggesting. So I was like, whatever. Like, this is the end of the world. It's also, they're teenagers. Who cares? Here's a kiss. Let's go. Let's move on to the next thing. But boy, can't wait to talk about that Chloe bit later.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Leave it at that.
So I've always thought that Warren was a bit of a dud as a character, and I could go into reasons why, but there are at least 2 or 3 distinct moments earlier in prior episodes where you, if you want, you can kind of text Warren back, you can go see a movie with him, like little things like to reciprocate his affection. And he's definitely a sort of, like, he strikes me as a bit of an over-eager character. And this diner sequence was probably the easiest I've ever rejected, like, a character in a video game. Like, I didn't feel remotely bad. The game gives you a couple options. There is like a smooch, there's a hug, and then you can just decline all physical contact with him, which I thought was cruel but hilarious. And that's how I handled the scene in this episode.
I don't blame you. Like, it feels like this was a weird moment to be like, well, is it going to happen? Are you going to be a thing? How do you
define the relationship?
Yes, exactly.
And there's also a scene later in this episode, which we'll talk about, where you can kind of go and find Warren's locker, so to speak. This is in like a broken reality nightmare sequence. But what you find in his locker, I think, is like further underscoring my worries about him as a character. And we've seen him go a little bit unhinged before, like where he, at least in my playthrough, beat Nathan senseless. Like we've seen some potential for some pent-up rage issues and some potentially obsession issues. And just I find the locker reveal to be a very alarming one for his character.
Sorry, what's in the locker?
Do you want me? I'll just jump ahead. Like we're not there yet, but like reality breaks down and Max has to evade a bunch of people in like a nightmare sequence of flashlights. Like people are just turning corners, pointing. Like it's a stealth sequence. But in order to get one of the achievements, you have to circle to a route that's just, I don't think you would normally find your way there because it's kind of out of the way. But then you open up this locker, and inside of it's clearly Warren's locker. It just has like all of these like pictures of Max and like these love notes, like this very obsessive, like he almost like he has like a secret folder like Jefferson in his binders of Max. So there's like a shrine to this young woman that he's created, and
like
again,
a Helga Pataki like style.
Yes, a football head shrine in the closet.
Yeah, it makes me really, really uncomfortable to see that. Like, it's just not normal behavior. But obviously, there, as a player, you can interpret this as this is a fiction of Max's worries about this guy, where like this is her like anxiety about what could be the case with how his feelings have been developing for her, or this could be a genuine insight into the character, one that we just normally would not get psychological access to. And I think I lean towards interpreting this as this is probably how Warren really feels. I don't think he literally has a shrine for Max in his life. So something it's hard to straddle that line, but
it's more of a compulsion than like a crush.
Yeah, and I didn't see this on my first playthrough. Like, I was only going through for the achievements this time. I just breezed right through. Well, breezed is the wrong word for that sequence, but I was forcing my way towards the conclusion of that sequence. Only this time I had to take a little detour. So,
Skipping back to where we were, so after the Warren choice, that's when you use the photo to essentially try and get a best playthrough, which I believe the photo brings you back to right outside the Vortex Club, and that's when you unload onto Chloe on every single thing that happens, and it's really like a long sequence of you just going through different dialogue options, but unlike other episodes, you cannot rewind time. What you choose here is what you get, and I think after that, like, go ahead.
We've beaten up a lot of the voice acting in this game in previous podcast episodes, and I think fairly so. But there is one exchange from Max's voice actress in this scene that I actually wrote it down because of how it was. I thought it was just really well delivered. At least it carried the emotion effectively for me. And she says, I can't keep fixing everything if I'm just going to break it over and over again, because Chloe's response to learning about all of the trauma that Max has been undergoing in these alternate timelines, like her consciousness has remained with her. It's not like she can forget about these horrors that have happened. And Chloe gives like a flippant, almost callous suggestion, just rewind, it'll be fine. Just like, it's not that simple. Max has been physically and mentally taking on this toll that is otherwise invisible. Like, there's this notion that pain is something that's really, really easy to doubt in other people, but when you're the one experiencing it, it's like the most real thing in the world. And so I think that this is a moment of Chloe being finally scolded by Max. And I thought the voice acting is really what made that a powerful line. It's not like the most well-written, eloquent line in the world, but it was a moment where, at least contrasting it with moments in episode 1, I really feel like the actors' chemistry worked well in this scene. I totally give it to you that line is... the impact is dependent on the delivery. But I also had so many moments, and maybe this is not a voice acting issue as much as it's an animation issue. There were so many moments in this episode specifically where it looked like the model's mouth was not moving. And there was like real variation in tone and volume and all of this stuff coming out. And it just looked like Jefferson's lips were pursed. You know, and not nothing was coming out. So it was a really weird, frustrating, like, I feel like I'm watching a dubbed movie in some ways.
The technical issue, right?
Yes.
How did you play again? Xbox?
Xbox.
Or PC?
Xbox.
Okay.
Original version of Xbox.
I want to bring in a question from the audience here because it's relevant. This comes from MatterofJoseph. Have you played Before the Storm? And I'm going to extend that to say, have you played any of the other games in the series? Flora, because I think Mike and I have not. I want to ask this because is the voice acting good, better, worse, and if so, in what entries? That was a lot of words.
I think I got the thrust of the question. Before the Storm, starting with, like, it's a prequel that was released after this game. It was also developed by other people, like I think it was Dontnod and Deck 9, respectively, who have taken over the franchise. I really enjoyed Before the Storm, but playing it after Life is Strange, it didn't hit me as emotionally as the original Life is Strange did. As to the voice acting quality and such, I remember it being good, or at least not as bad as Life is Strange 1. I mean, maybe I'm damning with faint praise there, but there are some distinct moments, and like Rachel Amber's character, who is voiced in that game, I think Chloe has a different performance as well in that game. We also have the introduction of Steph, who is a main character, or at least a primary character in Life is Strange True Colors. I think there's some really memorable moments and performances in that game. And then I have played the rest of the Life is Strange games. To the second half of the question, like Life is Strange 2, I think has some moments that are... I think the production quality went up quite a bit between those games. Even though I don't really like that game very much, Life is Strange 2. I wouldn't say that any of my gripes are to be laid at the feet of the voice actors. Life is Strange True Colors is, I think, actually quite fantastic. Like, I think the voice acting is top notch. I don't remember having any like goofy moments or any out of touch feeling lines. It's quirky and it winks and nods at the player for sure, like these, some earlier games do. But I think the production value has only gone up since the beginning, and I think it pays off. Those like animation issues that we were just describing kind of aren't present in those later games, and I think that's a strength for sure.
If you had to pick one game for us to play in this series on the show, which one would it be?
True Colors.
Done. Thank you for that. I want to finish Joseph's comment where he said, Have you played Before the Storm? If so, do you agree it's infinitely better than the original in basically every possible way? So it looks like Joseph agrees with you there. Okay, so took that little detour, but going back to the conversation with Max and Chloe, that's when you kind of unload everything to try and get to your ideal future, if you will. And that's kind of when the world starts to degrade after that conversation with Chloe, right? Boy, it goes left turn, right?
Yeah, you make your way back to the classroom initially, which is where the game began in episode 1, and Max is really starting to kind of lose her sense of reality at this point. She's wondering if she's in a time loop, and we mentioned in a previous episode a lot of dead birds being a visual.
Yeah.
The sequence in this classroom, like all of a sudden it sounds like rain or like almost hail or something hitting the window, and then you look over and then there's just kind of an uncountable amount of birds throwing themselves into the window and splattering across it, covering the windows like entirely. It's something that feels like almost like out of a horror film, although the setting of the classroom, I think, kind of balances that out quite well.
I think this was my favorite sequence in the entire episode, was that because after all the birds hit the window, your whole window is just red, and it actually like red light ends up coming into the classroom. No one is noticing, and then immediately after that, that's when Jefferson is in. If you go to the back of the room, he's editing your photos from the dark room on his laptop at the back of the room. And I believe also he insinuates when you speak to him that like, I'm going to enjoy killing you. It's just, or something along those lines. So it was like, I think that classroom section is probably my favorite part of this entire episode. Thematically, not because of what happens in it. Needed to put that out there. And then there's giant squirrels outside of dorm windows, and you take Victoria along for a ride at one point. It just goes crazy after this. Any highlights that y'all want to cover?
Yeah, it was the moment when reality starts breaking down and it becomes surreal, I think is the best way to describe it. Was the moment I was like, oh, this game's cool. I'd like this game a whole lot more if we had like moments like this earlier in the game. Some of these like showpiece moments, and I think it's in some ways really unfortunate that you have to, at least on in my view of it, like slog through some of those middle episodes to get to moments like this. So anyway, yeah.
I almost feel the opposite in a sense, because this is one of my least favorite episodes in the original Life is Strange. I think most of that is because so much of it feels like, I don't want to be insulting and say like it's padding or something, but there's just kind of an unnecessary amount of barriers between myself and the next story beat. And so like when you leave the classroom, you end up going like it's like opening a door like in PT to the next reality of like the dorms. And like then you have to like go through a series of the various rooms in the dorms, which keep opening into a further iteration of the same hallway. And I was getting impatient even on a second playthrough with it, knowing what to do. I'm here for like the emotional, like relational characters.
Flora, I'm entirely with you, and I thought I was going to be the only person that was going to say that this is probably one of the weaker episodes, because I come to this game, and sorry, I'm going to like just shrink it down to this, but like I come to this game for One Tree Hill, not Supernatural, which is probably like not the way to play Life is Strange. But I appreciate the time travel bit of it, but it's like the supernatural like butterfly effect stuff. Tornado in town that maybe I'm like, because really the tornado in town was in the first episode and the last episode, and then you kind of forgot about it, but it's actually, the story is actually not about, we could argue this, but the story is really not about Chloe. The story is about the town and about the supernatural things that are happening to it. I don't know. And I want it to be about Max and Chloe.
That's interesting. See, the the things that I was drawn to were more of the X-Files, Twin Peaks stuff. And you know, there's not a lot of the X-Files stuff earlier. There's a little bit more like Twin Peaks where, there's a little bit of quirk and weirdness and oddness happening. There's some Lynchian vibes, but for the most part, it's like American culture through the lens of some French person, in a moment in time. So I think it's interesting that we appreciated different episodes. But I'm with you that there was a lot of filler, or it felt like there was a lot of filler, except that if you look at this episode as a whole and you remove some of the quote-unquote filler, it feels like the conclusion you get to at the end, without jumping too far ahead, doesn't feel necessary. But we can pick that back up later.
The ending is bad, right?
I thought the ending made sense, and the game did not make sense to me until I got to the ending.
That is a polarizing take.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
No, I was just making a joke about the title of the episode. Sorry. I don't actually think either opinion is invalid.
There it is. I got there. I took a second. I think we need to talk about mechanically how the stealth sequence in this plays out, because it's like, what if Arkham Asylum was bad?
It's just a non-section. It's a non-section. There's no difficulty in it. You just rewind time until they're in an advantageous position for you, and then you walk past them. And they caught you. Just rewind them further back, but you stay in the same spot. It's the easiest quote-unquote stealth section I've ever played in a game. Sorry to be so definitive about that, but it is.
No, I think that's accurate.
There was one brief thing we skipped over leading up to this like maze sequence that I want to touch on, and then I want to talk about the maze sequence itself. So one of the final highlights of the section where reality starts to break for me is that in high school, in the actual academy, rather, we have a sequence played entirely in reverse, including the music and the subtitles and the dialogue and like the physical motion of what is happening on screen. I thought that was just a really cool thing. Like back to the presentation discussion about like how would I want these episodes to feel beat by beat. I think that was a really effective choice of how to show reality, falling apart and shattering. But to the maze itself, this is, I think, hands down, and I'm including the bottle sequence, I think it's my least favorite part in the game. I was not terribly frustrated, but when you fail, it feels like you're wasting your time. I've never liked stealth sequences in games. I think that's an open secret if you see my like gaming catalog. But like in a sequence like this, the voice, back to that again, like the amount of times that you hear the word Max, like just kind of like contextless, like just thrown at you, I find it just to be a draining scene to encounter. And the game even has like the audacity to make like a meta joke about the bottles. Like there's like you have to actually find the bottles in the junkyard again, which I have to imagine that at the time of reception that was maybe the least popular section in the game. But just the cheekiness of that on top of a sequence that I was also not enjoying, other than in terms of the visual presentation, was really just it was a bummer to cap off this episodic series with something that I found so dull.
I appreciated that in a sequence that they were trying to build as a horror story or a nightmare, they re-included the quest to find all these dumb bottles.
Yeah.
Because it was so fitting.
Yeah. It is for an optional photo, though, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I totally didn't give an F about those bottles and just blasted past everything.
Yeah,
So
I was pretty
end.
frustrated. So I was the same. I was like, I need to get through this, because every character is just like also showing you the most evil version of themselves. So you get Nathan essentially like being a crazed version of himself, and Jefferson the same. Principal Wells trying to catch you. So I again just wanted to make it through as fast as possible. We talked about it earlier, but I think it's also worth mentioning as well that during that sequence, you go through the dorms, you go through a maze. At one point you're back in the dark room, and there's a series of like almost flashbacks or flash forwards where different characters on the couch in the dark room are doing different things. At one point, for example, Chloe is on the couch with Mark, and they are having an intimate relationship. Another version of Max and Chloe are together and probably getting intimate, and Chloe at one point is in her underwear. Victoria's in her underwear jumping up and down on the couch.
No. Sorry, there's a Chloe and Victoria moment.
Yes, there's a Chloe Victoria moment, and then Chloe is jumping up and down in her underwear on the couch, which Flora.
This strikes me as something I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill about, but I was thinking about, like, from a writing perspective when playing this episode on the second time through, and there's this, like, portrayal and association of, like, voyeurism towards young women, like, in Jefferson's character, that's just, like, it's associated with criminality and, like psychopathy and just being inherently wrong, and yet the game wants to show us so many of these, like, young women, scantily clad, being intimate, like, whatever. Like, of course I don't mind that stuff at all, but like it seems like the game wants to critique it, and yet it is still doing the same thing, but in a way that doesn't convince me that it's self-aware. I felt that way again in a prior episode with like the swimming pool scene. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. It's the fact that I get a sense that the game wants the player to think critically about it, and yet fails to deliver a critical, like thoughtful approach in that regard. I don't know.
That was a weird moment, but I appreciated all the weird as like reality is falling apart.
And again, it might just be like a showcase of Max's insecurities. Like maybe she's feeling like some sort of like jealousy over Chloe and who she's intimate with, and like maybe she like those like sort of worst fears, corner of your mind, the things that you don't really even want to admit to yourself because you know they sound a little bit out there. I think that's one potential way to read what we're seeing in these sequences.
Final sequence of the game. I mean, you make your way through the maze. You end up in a bathroom where there's a series of 4-digit codes on the walls. You have to figure out which code applies. It's the only one that's in the mirror, which I think is maybe fitting. You make your way out. You make your way to the diner. We mentioned this before. Every character that you have interacted with in the entire story is there, and you can speak to them and essentially conclude or close off each story or get the most positive version of each character. And that's when you're faced with the final decision in the game. Anything we want to touch on before we talk about that? Okay. I'll set up that final decision. Essentially, Chloe comes to you. You're in front of the lighthouse, which is the thing that you're making your way towards in the maze. And Chloe realizes that in every single timeline, she is the problem. She dies in every timeline, and in every timeline where she does not die, terrible things happen to the people around her, either one or many people in the case of this tornado. So you're faced with a final choice. Chloe says, well, either I die and I reset the timeline, or it really like going Marvel, if you will, where it's if you allow me to live, everything's going to get destroyed in Arcadia Bay. If you allow me to die, everyone will be safe. Which one do you choose?
And this was the moment that I'm like, oh, that's what we've been building this all up to. And I was like, I don't know. I could not piece it together why all of these weird events were happening in the world. Like the double eclipse and the whales washing up on the beach and, every weird event. I was like, this is strange. Why is this happening?
Strange.
Sorry, I had to for Flora.
Strange.
I just couldn't piece it together. And then when it was explained, I was like, I'm a dummy. Like, yeah, of course. I could not piece those threads together. So it gave me some appreciation in a game where I felt like everything else you could see coming and could see how it was all going to piece together. And maybe everyone else saw it ahead of time. But I just know I didn't.
I didn't either.
Yeah, I don't know that I saw it, the connection clearly the first playthrough. And I think maybe those sort of delayed realizations are part of why I enjoyed this game so much on the first playthrough. I think that, like many of these choice-based adventure games, very few of them hold up to a proper full replay, like where you try out all of the other decisions and stuff. And then kind of knowing the significance of the tornado in the very beginning, like when you first see it in episode 1, it definitely didn't feel as mysterious and impending. It reminded me of the choice that we're going to have to make here.
I think it's probably best here that Mike and I go first, Flora, because I'd love to know what you did the first time and then the second time here.
I agree.
I decided to side with Chloe and sacrifice Arcadia Bay. She's been with me throughout this whole adventure. She's my best friend. If we want to talk about platonic versus romantic, we can do that. But I think like my best friend through thick and thin, I want to ride off into the sunset with my friend, and so that's what I did here. It was binary for me. I'm like, this is my friend. Screw everyone else.
As a friend, Jacob, I'm so glad to hear that. So glad to hear that. You might want to close your ears while I say my choice, was I took Arcadia Bay. I was like, I like totally hear what you're saying, Chloe, but also you seem so right that if I do anything to save you, like reality's just going to continue to like crumble and fall apart. So it's again, it felt like not a real choice on a lot of levels. And then also it's like, will I sacrifice an entire town for this one person? You know, I'm pulling that lever. The trolley is going after Chloe and not and not the rest of the town. So again, easy utilitarian calculus on my part. Flora, how did you feel?
In both playthroughs, what'd you do first?
Yeah, so when I originally played Life is Strange, this was one of the first games that had like explicitly queer themes in it, at least that I had played through, and so I latched onto Chloe right away, and just kind of, I was willing to ignore all of her flaws and deal with her selfishness and her impulsivity and all of these different things that on a second playthrough I think I was a lot more critical of. And when I got to this end scene, sure, the sort of binary gave me pause, sacrifice, or is it save or sacrifice? How does the language present itself?
I will check for you really fast.
Well, regardless of what you do, when you save Arcadia Bay or save Chloe or vice versa, up until this point, all of the choices that you've made pretty much have been reversible, and this one obviously is not going to be that. And prior to the sequence on, like, you're back on the cliff by the lighthouse, you're looking out at the tornado, one of the most recent things that happens in that sort of like broken reality nightmare sequence is that you walk through this like linear path of like memories with Chloe or like different versions of Chloe, and it sort of like takes you through a highlight reel of all the memories that you've collected with her over the course of the episodes. It truly butters you up with Chloe affection leading up to this choice. And I think that seeing how heavy-handed that was on a second playthrough was really interesting to me because I didn't feel the heavy-handedness on the first playthrough. So, all right, the choice.
Sacrifice or sacrifice?
Sacrifice. Okay, thank you. First playthrough, I think I was reasoning a lot closer to Jacob. Like I was in my head, I was shipping together Max and Chloe. Like I really wanted them to like be together, not just like reconnected friends, but I really did feel like there was potentially a romance budding there. And like it was sort of like from the perspective of the player, like I see them like balancing each other out in terms of their personalities, and you can see indications that Chloe is maturing and growing, and the fact that she even urges Max in this scene to sacrifice the Bay instead of herself. I think that really concretized to me that, okay, this is going to, I mean, it's going to be a harsh reality, but like maybe some of the people who are sheltering in the town will be okay. Like it's just property damage maybe because there was an evacuation sequence. I don't know. And anyway, it almost struck me in the first playthrough as like okay, I'm going to take the selfish path and embrace that and not feel guilty about it. And so I sacrificed Arcadia Bay. This playthrough, this was something I was intending to do from the beginning. I was going to sacrifice Chloe and save the Bay because just thinking more, and maybe it's back to the utilitarian calculus discussion again. But I not only wanted to see how the story ended differently, like there's different ending cutscenes and such, but I also felt so much less attached to Chloe in this second playthrough than I did on the first run, where I was, all of those feelings of affection just struck me as transparent insecurity in a way that, or rather immaturity, I think is what I wanted to say. Like, I didn't connect with Chloe because she strikes me as someone that, like, in real life I would probably dislike a little bit, or at least some aspects of her personality. I probably wouldn't want to spend significant time around her because she demands a lot of the people around her. She gets in, like, she's a rebel just for the sake of being one.
Yeah, I was going to say she's an anarchist just to say that she's an anarchist.
Yeah, I just no longer feel so much affection for her character, and so I was going to sacrifice Chloe on the second playthrough no matter what, just to see it. But this time I actually felt like that was probably the thing that I thought was right here, like sacrifice Chloe, because yes, she has contributed to so many problems throughout these stories. That doesn't mean she deserves to die, but she herself is urging you to make this choice, and there are clearly innocent people whose lives you can save simply by intervening. Like, she was going to die to begin with in episode 1 if your magical powers hadn't intervened. So that was the pathway. I sacrificed Arcadia Bay first time, sacrificed Chloe the second time, and I feel like those were the right decisions for both playthroughs for me.
Mike, I feel like you want to say something here.
No, just that it makes sense. Like, I think your rationale is really clear, and despite picking different ones at different times, both seem like they were the right choice at the right time. I also think the follow-up... Okay, so I will also mention, I briefly alluded to this earlier, that there is like a kiss at this point, and in my playthrough, it felt like this kiss came out of the blue. Like I was not picking up any of the like Chloe and Max vibes until like there's that one moment in the room, and even then it felt like it came out of the blue, so that's why I didn't like carry it forward. So this kiss at the end felt extra like, whoa, like that doesn't even reflect the choice I made earlier in the game. This feels like, oh, maybe I should have made that original choice a different way, because this seems like now it's canon. It felt like it was something they, on some level, were like, no, this is supposed to happen. So I thought that was interesting. And then without, I think, needlessly rushing us too far forward, I think the way that it plays out once you've made the choice, at least to let Chloe go, is really, really powerful, really, really impactful.
I mean, we're there. Do you want to jump into that?
Yeah. So what I would say is, beat by beat, feel free to hop in and correct me if I get something wrong, but you're basically teleported right back into that moment in the bathroom where you're taking a photo of that butterfly. And Max is clearly torn apart because she's looking at the door. She knows what's about to happen. And she just has to sit there and not only just know that it is going to happen, but like essentially bear witness to it in a lot of ways. It's not like she can just, just not be there. She has to be there for it to happen. So I thought that was really like potent and powerful. And then the song selection, I'm a big fan of Foles. I thought Spanish Sahara was like a perfect way to go out. It just builds at the right time. It felt like on some level a moody teenage version of that scene in Goodfellas, which, Flora, you're cocking your head a bit. Goodfellas is famous for a scene at the end that was cut to the closing song, where all of the mobsters are either caught, killed, or put in prison, and beat by beat of the song, and it felt very similar to that, with all of the scenes in the end of the game timing with the rising tension in Spanish Sahara. Jacob, what happens in your version?
Well, like that's like in comparison, that's lame. So it sounds like the butterfly.
Ours is lame or yours is lame?
No, mine is lame in comparison.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So the song is Sid Meier's Obstacles. I had a glitch where like I had no sound in my finale, so I had to go watch it on. I watched it on YouTube. It's fine. But essentially, it's just you leave Arcadia Bay together in the truck, and that's it. Like you essentially ride off into the sunset together, and that's it.
Yeah, that doesn't sound as good.
In your section, it's like some of the points you have to relive the trauma that you have, but this time without Chloe, right?
Exactly.
So much better.
Yeah, it feels like the thematically appropriate ending. Like there's even like a funeral sequence and everything where you see all the characters kind of garbed in black and just processing the loss together, because surely like this death is going to leave a wake in the community. Like it wasn't just localized to Max and Chloe's relationship, but then you see those pensive moments where clearly Chloe is still on Max's mind, and that tragic ending, I think, is so much more meaningful compared to the simple drive-through of the rubble. I was actually kind of astonished with it. I think I haven't timed this, but I think it's actually a longer ending as well. And so that's it's several minutes. I don't want to overestimate and oversell it, but I remember the original Sacrifice Arcadia Bay ending being quite short. So.
It's like less than 90 seconds. It's like 60 to 90 seconds. And so this ending, it sounds like it's multiple minutes long.
It is, yeah.
I have a question. It comes from the community. It's relevant. It's from Setobox. They ask, did you guys feel that the game's ending seemed rushed, or that there was a third option to the final choice? So I think the question is like, was it rushed, and should there have been a third choice here? I'm going to spoil Mass Effect 3 so skip forward 10 seconds if you don't want to hear this. Mass Effect. Oh boy. Okay, never mind. No one here has played Mass Effect. Okay.
I've only played the first two.
Okay, I won't.
I'm like
never
halfway
mind
through
then.
the third. How dare you?
Folks
just
know
for the
what I'm
listeners,
talking about.
both Flora and I pulled our headphones off to allow Jacob the 10 seconds to spoil this game.
Not worth it. Not worth it. Mass Effect 3, wink. That's all you need to know.
Okay.
Should there have been a third? I don't really know if there could have been a third choice here. Do nothing? Die together?
So I want to address the first part of the question as well, which is like, do I feel like this was rushed? I do not think that the choice at the end, the final choice, felt rushed in any way, because you spend so much time reminiscing and building up to the moment in the episode. Like, it feels like the episode kind of truncates all of its options throughout just to get you to that final choice. And it sort of adds support to that being the only decision of the episode. But I didn't feel like the pacing of it was rushed. In fact, the opposite, as expressed, like all of the maze sequences and puzzle-y sequences and just things that I wasn't really here to linger with personally. But I do think that, like, as we discussed about episode 4, like the Jefferson twist was really rushed, and we don't spend a ton of time with him as the villain, and he's taken out almost immediately or like very soon in this episode. So parts of the narrative I do think were quite rushed. But the Max-Chloe relationship, the choice as it's presented, and then the amount of time that you kind of sit with that choice, I think that was about right, although I think it could have been interesting to see like a little more narrative, maybe some dialogue choices, not actually major choices, after the binary final choice. As to whether there should be a third choice, I personally think that 2 makes the most sense here. I like the play on words of the word polarized for the episode's title being both, like binary polarization, but also like, the photography sort of suggestions there too. I'm not well versed enough to really speak to all of that, but if you were to add in a third choice, it's hard to know what you could do that would be meaningful. Like I imagine that one would want a happily ever after sort of scenario where both Chloe and the Bay can somehow coexist, but I think that would undercut what we were just describing if you do in fact sacrifice Chloe.
So totally agree with you, Flora. I feel like the episode goes out of its way to show you that all of these other potential endings can't exist. There's really only this one. And I gotta be honest, I don't think the ending where Chloe can walk away from this makes any real narrative sense. Because it's like, if all of these natural disasters are going to happen because she is still alive when she should have been dead early, she's evading her fate, some like Final Destination stuff. What is to make us believe that she'll suddenly be able to live a full life somewhere else? Like that this is only a localized thing within Arcadia Bay. So it just doesn't stack out to me. It also, it just feels like a non-option. Like, feels like Chloe is supposed to die. It doesn't feel like it makes much sense to me for her being able to live. It feels like on some level it might make the player playing the game feel better about not having to be railroaded into that ending, but I don't think it makes any real narrative sense.
Well, I mean, that's the reason I did it, is I wanted my happy ending, but I went through the motions with that, and I guess I was disappointed with the outcome. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting.
I think also, like, I played this game at a time when there were no other Life is Strange games out. There might have been Before the Storm, if I think about it, but that was billed as a prequel. And so, like, it felt like this was sort of going to be the end of that storyline. I think one of the listener questions that came in has to do with this. If you want
me to read it out?
Yeah.
It comes from JayDangerRoss. Do you think they could do another game with these characters the way it ended? Because it's been rumored that they are going to. Isn't Life is Strange 2 a direct sequel to this?
So I can only speak vaguely about this in case any listeners want to pick up Life is Strange 2. But there are some direct things that do continue, but the story of Max and the story of Chloe is essentially finite to this game. Like I'm resisting wanting to spoil anything, but there is a little like wink and a nod that happens in one of the earlier episodes of Life is Strange 2 where this choice will kind of echo through that first episode. And so I thought that was kind of cool. It's almost like importing a save from game to game, but the specific characters involved are almost non-existent in the second game, and it feels, because there's no time travel mechanic, like a totally structurally different game anyway, that I would be hard-pressed to call that like a direct continuation or like a sequel. I think the other part of the question that I want to kind of nail down is whether or not I think that these characters should get a second series game, like Max and Chloe specifically. Would I want to follow them through? And like as Mike was suggesting, it feels like sacrificing Chloe is kind of the canonical ending here, or like the one that we should take. And I think it'd be really hard to just rewrite the game where Chloe exists in that story. So it would be really, really tough. And like as a writer, like I think that would be an uncomfortable way to like MacGuffin your way out of something. But I think it would be kind of neat to follow up Max in the future if she did have her powers somehow. But I just don't think that's ever going to happen, given the nature of how Life is Strange has become almost like a serialized sort of different pocket universe sort of IP.
There are very few games that take a canonical ending into a sequel. Like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think at the end of Infamous 2, there's two choices, and in the sequel, they actually take one of the endings and say, like, no, canonically, this is the ending that we're bringing into our next game. But beyond that, I can't think of any other titles that do that, where they say, like, this is the canonical ending. If you didn't pick this, doesn't matter. This is what we're moving forward with.
Well, I think like the analogy here is like Telltale games, and I think of like The Walking Dead. Like, I won't spoil the ending for anyone who hasn't played it, but it's a really powerful and emotional ending. But the threads do resolve in sort of a way that can be picked up quite naturally in a Walking Dead season 2. So like I've seen games that are kind of structured like this do that well. But as of like an ending presented like in Life is Strange terms, the outcomes are so incredibly drastically different that I don't think that you can possibly resolve that without kind of boldly declaring, hey, y'all are wrong, this is the right ending. And I think that would really alienate people. So
this would be the audience that would not take that well.
Correct.
Yeah. I want to read off one comment that came in through the Discord, and most of these questions came in through the Discord, so if you are not in our Discord, do us a favor, leftbehindgame.club/Discord. You can jump in and talk with some fine folks about video games. This is a comment that came in from Link HS from the Discord. They wanted to make a comment about episode 4 that I thought was stellar and wanted to read it. So, and it's specifically about disability as a burden in that 4th episode, so I'm just going to read it. My biggest two issues with this section in episode 4 was that they were only showing characters with disabilities as a burden to their loved ones, and 2, having the option to have everyone, including the player, completely disregard a disabled person's agency over their life and body. I know this is a terrifying reality for many people with disabilities, mental illness, chronic illness, so it would have felt better to offset with even just one character with a visible disability that seemed to be living a good or normal life. They go on to say that they appreciate the strides that have been happened with disability representation over the last 7 years, with games like Celeste and Chicory are great at portraying struggles with mental health while letting players safely interact with themselves physically and emotionally. I thought the comment was great, so if you want more great video game discussion that covers games from all angles, check out our Discord, leftbehindgame.club/Discord. I think at this stage, what we should do is give our final thoughts on this episode and this series. Maybe I'll start with Mike, because Mike, you've been silent for a little while. Tell us, did you like this episode? Did you like this series?
I think I enjoyed this episode because it made it all come together. I think it was also the most inventive. I thought it was the most technically interesting. I thought it was the most visually interesting. It was the most satisfying in a lot of ways, because, as we identified earlier, I was here a little bit more for the Twin Peaks, a little bit more for the X-Files than I was.
Play Alan Wake.
Yeah, from the other stuff. That said, I'm glad that I played this with a walkthrough because I did not want to spend more time with it. As sad as that might sound, I realized, I think a couple episodes in, that this was not a game made for me. Like, I was not the intended audience for it, so I didn't feel like I should punish it too harshly for not being made for me. But at the same time, I also didn't super enjoy it because it wasn't a game made for me. Like, I appreciated elements of it. Yeah, but on the whole, felt like I would have been okay had I not done it. I am glad that I did experience it, though, so that way I have more of a reference and touch point for, games that people play and like and can have better discussions about going forward.
Are there adventure games that you really look back on with like reverie? Or is it an adventure game, like Telltale style adventure game problem for you?
I love Telltale games. Like, I feel like I enjoyed the Batman Telltale game that we played. I feel like I enjoyed The Walking Dead. I think some of them are a little bit lacking, but most of them are good. Like Clementine was such a great arc in that first series of The Walking Dead. So, yeah, hard to put it on the type of game, and it really does feel like it was made for a person other than me, and I'm really glad that it exists for those people. I just also know there are a lot of games that I play that are probably not created for them. So yeah.
Flora?
Let's talk about the episode first. I found this to be maybe, I hinted at this earlier, maybe my least favorite in the series, mostly because of just what you end up doing. Like, the interactable parts of the game, I think, are really just not what I'm here for. The things that work for me really well in these adventure games are dialogue trees and choices that you make with other characters, and seeing how, like, even the sort of stereotypical so-and-so will remember that. Like, as hokey as that is and easy to make fun of as that is, I find the branching narrative as a video game concept to be really fulfilling, at least on a first playthrough. It engages me just enough to keep me moving forward. As for the series as a whole, I think this game came into my life at like a really perfect period. Like, I think I received Life is Strange at the time where I would have liked it and responded to it the most. And so, like, this is off the back of, I was really, really into time travel stuff. Like, Doctor Who was one of my favorite shows at the time. And this is also when I had first started delving into like queer literature and just like studying the history of like LGBTQ rights and just things like that as well. And I think that all of that was coalescing in this game. The music, as I've mentioned, is some of my favorite video game music, even though most of it is licensed, of course. I think that the use of it, like Mike was describing earlier, and like sort of, what is it, the Goodfellas reference? Like, I think that the use and the implementation of music in this game is stellar. And as far as the adventure game format goes, being able to time travel, like rewind through your choices. My first playthrough, I looked at all of the major choices. Like, I would make one and then I would go back and I would make the other one, and then I would actually weigh my options and move forward. I wrote an article, my very first article for Epilogue, about how this game was like, I think I called it like a ludonarrative lighthouse or something like that, like a cheesy, hokey play on the lighthouse image in this game. But I thought that this was like the pinnacle of the Telltale genre at the time. But unfortunately, this second playthrough didn't land nearly as well for me. There were a couple episodes. I definitely think episode 2 would be a high point for me. I think that when it deals with real world issues like mental health struggles, like with the character Kate, those are the things that really, really work for me. And seeing how teenagers grapple with that messy reality, and sort of how something like a superpower can just destabilize what is already a really uncertain period in one's life. That all worked really well for me. But the actual moment-to-moment, like, was I enjoying myself on the second playthrough? Not really, and I find that unfortunate for a game that previously held a high degree of esteem in my heart. Like, I would have put Life is Strange in my top 10 or top 25.
Wow.
Now, like, it was that important to me in terms of what it did to open up my eyes for the storytelling potential of video games. And I am now sitting on the other side of a second playthrough feeling like I don't think I'll ever need to revisit this again. And I do think I'll always have a soft spot for the characters of Max and Chloe, and I will think fondly, like, if one of my friends told me they were streaming a first playthrough of this game on Twitch, I would be there. That would be a fun experience to just kind of, ooh, how are you going to make your decisions? What choices are you going to make? What are you thinking about ahead of time? Those elements of the unknown are really, really fun, but there's just not much here when you replay it, and I think that's a bit of a shame, even on like a 100% walkthrough like I was doing.
The article is titled "Life is Strange: A Ludonarrative Lighthouse in the Darkness." It is from 2018. We'll link it in the show notes if anyone wants to read through that. So my first playthrough, on paper, having loved a lot of the Telltale games, and then having a soft spot for like high school fiction and dramas, I thought that this game would be like entirely my bag. And I think it's a mixed bag in that what I wanted out of the story was less supernatural and more what impact does time travel have on the relationships that these high school students have. And so that's why like I really loved episodes 1 through 3 and then parts of episode 4. But for me, like the game kind of falls apart in the 5th episode because of the focus on the supernatural and the fact that really like we're building up the entire series to who is like the whodunit, the real like Scooby-Doo moment of like who's under the mask that is causing the problem, and that kind of gets resolved like almost in passing, where like I don't want to say we Trojan horse that like it was Chloe all along, but I don't necessarily feel like that was earned, at least like from my perspective. So when I speak about Life is Strange, I'm going to look back and say like I enjoyed most of my time with that. I appreciate that this exists. I want more games like this, both from many dimensions, like a queer representation perspective, from a like narrative, like in that like 18 to 25 like year old time in your life when everything is a problem, in the adventure game style. Like give me more of that, which is why like I'm super excited to play through Life is Strange True Colors. Maybe we'll even do it on the podcast, who knows. But it's a mixed bag. Would I recommend Life is Strange? I would, with like a caveat of maybe it doesn't fully pay off for the player, but there are other adventure games I would jump into before it. I mean, I hate to always go back to the Telltale's The Walking Dead, but the reason why a lot of people talk about it is because it's great and it was revolutionary, especially season 1 when it came out. But even like Telltale's Batman, I think the first season of that is great, and you don't even have to be a fan of that IP to be to enjoy it. So mixed bag. Episode 5 was a letdown. But again, I don't want that to discourage you from playing if it's something that you look on the surface and you're like, that's probably a thing I would like. Music, character development, sure, it's a little hokey with the dialogue at times because it was written by Frenchmen who don't really know American culture as well as they think they do. But here we are. Life is Strange.
Life is
Any
strange.
Final thoughts? Life is, how many times, what I need anyone to do is if you want to listen back to this.
Someone's done it.
Please, if you've done it, find us on Twitter at Left Behind Club or on Instagram at Left Behind Game Club or in the Discord like I mentioned before, and just tell us how many times did we say the word strange, because it's probably 50. But again, if you've listened and kept track, let us know. Anything else? Going once? Going twice? Sold. You know where to find us on the internets, but do us a favor if you listen to the show. If you listen on Spotify, give us 5 stars because it really helps. And if you're listening on iTunes, give us a review and a 5-star review at that. If it's going to be 4 or 3, don't be 4-star, Ben. Give us a 5-star review. That's a throwback for you all-time listeners. But yeah, do that and subscribe on Apple because, again, all of this helps the podcast find more people, get more folks in the community to talk wholesomely about video games.
Shout out Ben Ionetta.
Mike, where can you be found on the internet?
You can find me at RuffaloM on most social places online, or you can find me at michaelruffalo.com. Moreover, you can find me in the Discord, where I will be hopping into, I think I'm the one that shares the most, like, hey, this game's free on Epic, or this cool thing just got added to Game Pass. So yeah, if you wanna be updated on that, that's where you can find me. And yeah, just hanging out whenever I have free time, which is not that often, but that's where you can find me. Flora, where can the people find you at?
You can find me on Twitter at LudoNarrativeFM, and as well as the Discord, where every Friday we've been posting Yakuza GIFs, and it's become a bit of an ongoing tradition.
It's my favorite ritual.
If you want to come in and add a GIF of choice of Kiryu or Majima dancing at the disco, definitely head into the Discord as well. And finally, you can check out my written work at epiloguegaming.com. Recently just published a really, really, really long piece on the mobile game Near Reincarnation, and I have a piece coming out just after this episode on the recipe for yakisoba pan from the game 13 Sentinels. So if any of that interests you, check that out.
That's a game I want to play, but it's still pretty expensive. That's a Vanillaware joint, isn't it?
Yeah. I see it on half off all the time. I'll drop it in the game deals section of the Discord if you're keeping an eye on it.
Hey! You can find me on the internet at Jacob McCourt on all major social media platforms, JACOBMCCOURT. Twitter is where I do my thoughts, where they go. But more importantly, I've been making daily TikToks for almost 4 months now as of the recording of this video. So I would appreciate you dropping a follow there. I'm posting about video game history, about esports, about content creation, and occasionally some really random memes that I learned from 17-year-olds. So follow me there at Jacob McCourt. That's the end of our show. Michael, what do we say to him?
And that, my friends, is one less game left behind.
Welcome to episode 145 of the Left Behind Game Club. This week,
Exactly.
Hey, I'm Jacob McCourt.
I'm Katie Lesbrance.
And I'm Travis Colnut.
We are hosting a brand new podcast called Cutscenes.
There are tons of video game podcasts and tons of TV film podcasts, but we're going to bring you the intersection of both and talk about video game, movies, and TV.
I know what you're thinking. Aren't most of them not very good? Wrong. Some of them are fine. And we're going to tell you all about them.
Make sure to subscribe on your podcasting platform of choice. Follow us on Twitter at cutscenes_pod. And most importantly, give us a listen. See you soon.
Cutscenes, a video game movie podcast.